Welcome to a special episode of History Day Night. I'm Justin. Today is Memorial Day, the last Monday of May, and we wanted to step away from our usual chronological journey through World War II to look at what this day actually is. Not just the start of summer, and not just a long weekend. We do this podcast because we believe history matters. Today is a day that puts a lot of perspective on exactly why.
I'm Jennie. Justin and I talk about war a lot on this show. The politics, the strategy, the grand movements of armies across countries, but Memorial Day isn't really about any of that. It's about the individual cost of all of it. The people who didn't come home. And because we've been spending so long immersed in the history of the Second World War, we wanted to talk today about what Memorial Day looked like during that war, how this holiday came to exist in the first place, and what it means to us personally.
Let's start at the beginning, because the origin of Memorial Day is one of those stories that most people don't know.
The U.S. Civil War ended in the spring of 1865, and it had killed somewhere around 620,000 American soldiers, more than any other war in United States history, before or since. The country was devastated. Communities had lost fathers, sons, brothers, neighbors, and in the aftermath, people started doing something instinctive and human. They went to the graves, brought flowers, and honored the dead.
One of the earliest documented Memorial Day observances was organized by a group of formerly enslaved people in Charleston, South Carolina, in May 1865, less than a month after the Confederacy surrendered. They gathered at a racetrack that had been used as a prison camp during the war, where Union soldiers had died in captivity and had been buried in a mass grave. The freedmen dug up the bodies, gave them proper individual burials, built a fence around the grounds, and then held a ceremony. Teachers, ministers, black Union soldiers stationed nearby, and children singing hymns.
Other communities were doing similar things independently. 3 women in a small Pennsylvania town had decorated soldiers' graves the year before, in 1864. Many different places have some claim to being the first. In 1966, the federal government officially declared Waterloo, New York, the birthplace of Memorial Day. They'd been holding a community-wide commemoration annually since May 5, 1866, with businesses closed and residents decorating graves with flowers and flags.
But it was in 1868 that it became something larger. Major General John A. Logan, leader of the main organization for Union veterans, issued a proclamation calling for a nationwide day of remembrance on May 30th. He called it Decoration Day. The date was chosen deliberately, not the anniversary of any particular battle. He also reasoned, with a practicality that I personally appreciate, that late May allowed for the, quote, choicest flowers of springtime, end quote, to be available across the country. On the first official Decoration Day, an Ohio congressional representative, a former Union general named James Garfield, who would later become President of the United States, spoke at Arlington National Cemetery, and around 5,000 people came. They decorated the graves of 20,000 Civil War soldiers buried there with small American flags.
By 1890, every northern state had made Decoration Day an official state holiday. Southern states observed separate days for their Confederate dead for years afterward. The holiday didn't fully unify until after World War I, when it expanded to honor Americans who died in all wars. The name gradually shifted from Decoration Day to Memorial Day. Congress passed a law in 1887 referring to it as Memorial or Decoration Day. It still wasn't a federal holiday. That didn't happen until 1971, when the Uniform Monday Holiday Act passed in 1968 gave it its permanent home on the last Monday of May. A tradition that began in 1865 took more than 100 years to become an official federal holiday.
Since we spent all of our time on this podcast in 1939 so far, we wanted to talk about what Memorial Day looked like during the Second World War, and the answer is familiar, but different in ways that reflected the reality of fighting a global war.
The Decoration Day parades continued. They were still held every year during the war, but the home front transformed what they meant. Parades and civic gatherings frequently doubled as massive rallies for the war effort, selling war bonds, collecting scrap metal, collecting rubber and fats for the war industry. The holiday became part of the machinery of a country that had turned itself entirely toward winning. Remembering the dead and supporting the living soldiers happened on the same afternoon at the same gathering.
As American forces fought across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific, temporary military cemeteries were established in combat zones. In France, in Belgium, in Italy, in the Philippines, on Pacific islands that most Americans have never heard of. Memorial Day ceremonies were held at all those temporary grave sites while the war was still going on. Soldiers honoring their fallen comrades in the same soil where they'd fought.
After the war, those temporary burial grounds were consolidated into 14 permanent overseas American cemeteries, and those ceremonies have continued every year since. The most famous is probably the Normandy American Cemetery in France, located on the bluff above Omaha Beach, with 9,389 white marble crosses and stars of David arranged in perfect rows looking out over the sea. Every Memorial Day, the French hold ceremonies there honoring the Americans dead on their shores. 60, 70, 80 years on, they still come. That is the kind of gratitude that is humbling to think about.
And it's part of why we do this podcast. Not just because the Second World War is fascinating history, although it is, but because those 9,389 graves and the hundreds of thousands of others represent real people who lived real lives and were placed in a position where the ultimate cost was extracted from them. Understanding the war they fought in, and really understanding it, the politics, the timing, the choices that led to it, feels important to us. Now I want to take a moment to talk about something more personal. My family has a long military history in the United States, and I'll share some of it in this episode, and we'll look into Jennie's in a future episode. Some of my 5th great-grandfathers served in the Revolutionary War. Johann George Burckhardt served on Washington's personal guard, and Lieutenant Johannes Peter Nothstein, who served as a Pennsylvania long rifleman. Those men were fighting for something that didn't exist yet. The United States was not a country when they picked up their rifles. They were fighting to make it one. Every Memorial Day and every 4th of July, I think about that. The country we take for granted began with men like them making a choice that could have gotten them hanged. Further along the family line, one of my 3rd great-grandfathers, Frederick Gubard, served as an artilleryman in the 4th Regiment of the United States Artillery. Then there's my great-grandfather, Harley Notstein, who served as a private in the American Army during World War I. And my grandfather, Jack Notstein, who was in the Navy during World War II, stationed at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Illinois. And I think about that sometimes when I'm reading about the Atlantic convoys, or the invasion of Poland, or the young soldiers trapped below decks when HMS Royal Oak sank in Scapa Flow. Those were real people, exactly like my grandfather, young men away from home doing something enormous. Jack was stationed at the Great Lakes. He didn't go to sea, but he served. He was part of it. But the men who did go to sea and didn't come back were people exactly like him.
I think that's what Memorial Day is really asking us to do. Not just to attend a parade or go to a cemetery, though those things matter too. It's asking us to make it personal, to not let the numbers become abstractions. 407,000 Americans died in World War II. That number is so large it becomes almost meaningless. But it's 407,000 Jack Notsteins. 407,000 families who got a telegram instead of a son coming home.
And the same is true of every war. The Civil War, the American Revolution, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The names on the memorials are the end of a story that started with a family who loved them. This holiday exists to hold that story open a little longer, to not let the names become just names.
At 3 p.m. local time on Memorial Day, there is a national moment of remembrance. If you're listening to this on Memorial Day and it's before 3 p.m., we gently suggest stopping whatever you're doing at that moment. A moment of quiet and reflection. It's a small thing, but it's moments like those that keep memory alive.
I also want to say, if you have family members who served, whether they're living veterans or people who are gone, we'd encourage you to learn their stories if you haven't already. Look in the attic, call a relative who might know, find the records. The names and dates in old documents connect to real lives that were shaped by the same wars we talk about on this show. Those stories belong to you and they're worth knowing.
Johann Burckhardt, Johannes Notstein, Frederick Gubard, Harley Notstein, Jack Notstein, and everyone like them in every family in America. That's who this day is for.
Have a meaningful Memorial Day. Thank you for listening to History Date Night. We'll be back with the next episode, episode 14, on Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. But today, we remember. We'll see you then.
See you then.